The Senate could vote as soon as Wednesday on a $118 billion national security package, but it could stop there. The bipartisan agreement pairs tens of billions of dollars in wartime and humanitarian aid for Ukraine and Israel with $20 billion for border security and includes changes designed to stem the number of migrant crossings and raise asylum standards. NewsNation's Khalil is live on Capitol Hill. And Joe, even before the details were released, there was already opposition to this bill.
That's right. And we have the perfect person actually to answer that opposition now. Senator James Lankford is the principal Republican author of this bill. So, Senator, I want to start off with just, the immigration pieces. I think there are two that are being talked about a lot. One is you've got serious changes to the asylum laws, and the other one is this emergency border shutdown provision. Right. Can you talk about that second one actually first?
Sure.
What is that actually going to do?
I think so there's been a lot of questions about what can we do right now to be able to make a difference. We've had 1 million people illegally cross our border just in the last 4 months. When you're hiring staff, putting processes in place, it takes time to be able to do that. And people say, I want something to make a difference right now to be able to turn that around. That's what this Border Emergency Authority does. It sets a number at 5,000. People said that's a really high number. But what's funny is that's lower than any day that we've had in the last 4 months, but 7. So that means the day after this bill passed, the next day, the border would shut down and it would change the default that is now to releasing thousands of people into the country that day to then immediately turning people around and 1,000 people out.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. So it's not 5,000 every day and then you shut it down. It's 5,000. The border would be shut down for a matter of potentially weeks. Until that number decreases.
That's correct.
75%.
That's correct. So it's a huge shift. Some people think it's like somebody at the border with a clicker counting 5,000 in every day. It's completely wrong on it. It's when we have a day like we had today, quite frankly, and like we had tomorrow, that well exceeded 5,000. Instead of releasing everyone in, everyone is turned around, and everyone's turned around for weeks until the numbers actually come down.
Okay, and it makes it the asylum standards stricter so that it's harder to apply for asylum in the U.S. So can you explain the changes?
I'll always say asylum's always hard. You go back just 10 years ago, we only had 21,000 people a year that even asked for asylum because it's very hard to be able to get. But the screening is now so simple in the process. You can just cross the border and say, I have fear in my country, and you're released. And now you're in a 10-year backlog, and people just disappear into that. So this doesn't make asylum harder. It makes it clearer at the beginning who qualifies and who does not. We set the screening standard higher for evidence. We add some additional things at the beginning to clarify who gets it and who doesn't. So the vast majority of people will be denied at the very beginning rather than 10 years later.
Okay. So let's talk about the politics. I don't need to tell you, the strongest opposition to your bill, it comes from your own party. Former President Trump says this is a horrendous bill. Speaker Mike Johnson says it's dead on arrival. Obviously, you have an uphill climb to try to sell this. And there are a lot of people who say this is not going to happen. Just your response to all of that.
So it is interesting. This bill, as it's come out in the past 24 hours, the very far left have been attacking it like crazy, and the far right have been attacking it like crazy to say we don't want to be able to do this. The challenge is it's not going to be everything that we want to be able to accomplish in border security. It deals with the most essential elements. It deals with asylum. It deals with faster processing. So I'm trying to be able to make it clear. I understand there's some people that say I want everything or I want nothing. But there's also a lot of people in America and a lot of people in Congress that say, why would we not make progress when we have the opportunity to make progress? We don't get this opportunity very often. We've got both sides looking at each other saying, let's do something. Then let's actually do something to solve as much as we can.
So I think you can objectively say the election year politics is getting involved in this, right?
It is.
So, I mean, again, what do you make of that? I feel like that's a pretty bitter pill for you to swallow, given that for the last 3 years, Republicans have been harping on the border being the number one issue, and it's like you've gotten many concessions from Democrats, and yet you are hitting, this political wall here.
Yeah, it is a challenge. If I go back a year ago, the House passed a great bill called H.R. 2 that was a border security bill because their statement was we need a change in law on the border, not just a change in policy, a change in law. 4 months ago, Senate Republicans locked arms and says we need a change in law. We're not going to do other national security issues until we get a change in law. Now people are saying, well, we don't really need a change in law. We just need the president to be able to enforce what's already existing. I get that. President Trump is running for president. He's got a job that he's trying to do to be able to run for president. I've got a job that I'm trying to do. I actually lead for Homeland Security, border security on our committee. My job is to help protect the nation and national security right now. So I'm working to do my job while he's working to do his.
So, I mean, but is that an acknowledgement that it seems like he wants to have the fight rather than the solution to the problem?
I would tell you, if President Trump was president right now, we would not have the chaos at the border that we're having. And I can show that evidence based on the time that he was in office, that even when we had a huge spike in 2019, we had 4,500 people crossing the border in a day. They were able to drive that number down to be able to do what it took to be able to get it back in control of the border. So if he was president now, we wouldn't have this chaos. But my focus is, how do we prevent this, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next 40 years, regardless of who's president? What authorities are missing? What loopholes are in our law that need to be closed so that we have a more stable, consistent border so that people that want to legally come here can, but people that are illegally crossing that we don't know who they are, they're not vetted, they're not allowed.
So is your path forward, if there is one at all, realistically, to combat, in interviews like this, not just, as you say, elements of the far left, but also members of your own party? Are you going to be taking them on publicly and making the case and saying you're interested in politics this year for the election year, and Senator Lankford is interested in finding solutions for the border?
Actually, everybody makes their own decision on it. There's some people that are going to oppose different elements of it. I'm not going to put words in their mouth to say they're all opposed to it based on presidential politics. That's not true. There's some people who disagree on the way it was written, what's in it, what's not in it, what they wanted to be in it, but it's not there. So they'll have all kinds of different reasons on this. My main focus right now is, okay, the document's out there. If you want to see change on it, let's amend it. Let's change it. But the worst case scenario is to do nothing and to be able to have an issue that's been an issue for decades unresolved.
Okay. And before we let you go on this, I also have to ask you about the foreign aid piece of this, because you've got $60 billion that would go toward Ukraine. Right. You've got aid for Israel and for Taiwan as well. Do you think there's going to be pushback there? And, if you have struggles with the border piece of this, do you think the foreign aid pieces could potentially be resurrected in some other form?
Yeah, hard to be able to tell at this point. Obviously, the House is debating this week just an Israel-only piece. We've got to decide both as a nation and as a Congress, do we want Putin slaughtering his neighbors in Ukraine just because he can? Because he'll continue to work to Moldova and then into NATO countries as well. He's made that very, very clear in the past. So we'd have to determine, are we going to help stop it now or keep it going? What are we going to do in our relationship with Israel, our close ally Israel, where they had a terrorist attack? They stood with us when we were attacked on terrorism. They're just asking us to be able to stand with them. And we have to determine in Taiwan, are we going to allow China to be able to threaten Taiwan and to be able to militarily take it over, or help Taiwan to be able to defend itself? Those are all issues. Plus, in this bill as well, there's also resupply for what's happening in the Red Sea right now, where you got Houthis that are attacking American ships and American shipping and international shipping. This bill also deals with that as well.
So the House now, House Republican leadership has put forward this bill just for Israel. It's at $17.6 billion for Israel aid by itself. Do you think that effort is going to undercut trying to get support for your bill, which has Israel aid plus Taiwan and plus Ukraine? And
it's hard to tell. There's a real mixture here. In the House, they're more united about assistance for Israel than they are for Ukraine, Taiwan, or for the border. Those areas divide more than Israel does. And so I assume the House is looking for something politically they can do that unites more people in the process. At the end of the day, even when you pass that, though, we still have to make a decision on what we're going to do in Ukraine, what we're going to do with Taiwan, and what we're going to do at a very open southern border.
Yeah. And just one more question for you. I think that's all we got time for here. Is you were negotiating with your Democratic counterparts, Senator Murphy, Senator Sinema, and also with the White House. How would you just characterize the way that negotiation all went down? This did take weeks. It led into months. Right. And so you arrived at this bill last night. But how was the negotiation process?
It was focused. It was intense at times, and it was professional. Everybody kind of walked in and understood we have a point of view on this and where we're going to go. For the last 4 months, I've been pushing to say, if we can't solve the problem, we shouldn't do this. We can't just have a messaging bill or something to say we did something and it doesn't actually change the status quo of what's actually occurring. Worst case scenario is the status quo remains, because we'll still have a flood of people coming into the country. So we've got a way to shut it down now. We have a way to be able to change the asylum laws in the future. We have to have a way to be able to process people faster. Those things were accomplished in this bill.
Okay. The man who was in the room for the negotiation through Christmas and New Year's and all that to get to the bill now. So, Senator, thank you so much for explaining all of that. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Kelly, we'll